Help sick and injured children by donating to my Extra Life campaign. Link in the description and pinned comment. All proceeds go to Children's Wisconsin. If we reach $1,000, I'll make my Discord server public.
This is delicious! It's just yogurt.
If you recall last month's countdown, you may remember that I put Street Fighter 1 at the top of the list. I cited its lack of character select, its janky controls, and its seemingly impossible special moves as the key reasons for this. That being said, for its time it was well received for treading into formerly unknown territory and was quite successful. At least the 6-button variation was. With that, the interest in a sequel began to build, and 4 years later, one of the most important games of all time was released, Street Fighter 2. This was the game that changed everything. To put it simply, Street Fighter 1 crawled so that Street Fighter 2 could fly. It pretty much did everything the original did, but astronomically better. And it's thanks to the immense success of this game that fighting games began to flourish and continue to flourish to this day. 35 years later, the series still continues to have a profound impact on fighting games, to the point where it's an esports highlight. And today, we're going to talk about what went so gloriously right about this game to spark such a revolution. Get ready, fighters! Here comes a new challenger! So let's pick up where Street Fighter 1 left off. The original cabinet with the hydraulic buttons didn't really sell that well. In fact, it was only about 1,000 units sold. You know, it might just be a me thing, but maybe a setup that wears out your arm wasn't exactly a good idea? Which is probably why Capcom decided to make the 6-button variation in the first place. Yeah, good call there. This variation managed to sell in the tens of thousands, so Capcom got interested in making a sequel. Thing is, before we got to Street Fighter 2, there was another attempt at a sequel. Capcom had been working on a significantly different game called Street Fighter 89, which would have had Ryu and Ken in a beat-em-up instead of the type of fighting game that marked their debut. However, the cast and setting were ultimately changed before the game was released. That game would become Final Fight, which would eventually be connected to the Street Fighter universe via the Alpha series. After Final Fight proved successful, Capcom decided to put more focus on fighting games. Designer Yoshiki Okamoto said that the basic idea was to take the ideas of Street Fighter and incorporate them into a better game. The game itself took 2 years of development time, with a budget of nearly $2.5 million, which equates to $4.5 million adjusted for inflation, and had a staff of 35 to 40 people, helmed by producer Noritaka Funamizu, Akira Nishitani as the game designer, and Akira Yasuda as the character designer. The game was developed for the CPS-1 arcade board, which was used for titles such as Strider, Ghouls and Ghosts, and Final Fight. Street Fighter II: The World Warrior ultimately released in early 1991, and while it did take a while for it to pick up steam in Japanese arcades due to many people not realizing the multiplayer potential, once the head-to-head aspect got marketed properly thanks to gaming magazines, it took off like a rocket. Meanwhile, in the US, it was almost an instant hit. So just what was it about Street Fighter 2 that made it so revolutionary? Let's pop a quarter in the slot and start this baby up! So let's start right away with the brand new character select screen. Instead of 2 characters locked to your player position, you now had your choice of 8 characters to pick from. Nowadays, we have insane rosters like this, or, oh
my god, I'm overwhelmed with choice!
But back then, simply having a choice of 8 was a huge deal. You had Ryu, the eternal challenger, Ken, his friend and rival, Chun-Li, an Interpol agent seeking to avenge her father's death, Guile, an Air Force officer who's looking for the one who killed his friend and comrade, Blanka, a mutated human who lived in the jungle after surviving a plane crash, Zangief, a wrestler from the former Soviet Union who grappled with bears, E. Honda, a sumo wrestler who values tradition, and Dalsim, a yoga master who was no doubt inspired by a combination of Stretch Armstrong and the Fire Breather act at the circus. Each one has their own unique stats, fighting styles, and techniques, so you are likely to find a character that fit your style, something that would be vital in fighting games moving forward. It was also pretty neat that you'd see your character's plane flying to the side of your next match on the map, which is also part of the character select screen. That's just the start of this game's revolutionary presentation. The CPS-1 had been used to make excellent sprite work before, but this was on another level. Expertly detailed character sprites made these characters look vibrant and spirited, and the backgrounds look alive. Not to mention, the soundtrack gave us many iconic tunes, with each character having a memorable theme. Some even transcend the game itself and are good with just about everything. These themes were mainly composed by Isao Abe and Yoko Shimomura. I am not kidding. The very same Yoko Shimomura who gave us the masterful themes from Kingdom Hearts, Mario & Luigi, and some of the music from Xenoblade Chronicles composed for this game.
How fitting that Ryu can now duke it out with Shulk, Mario, and Sora in Smash Ultimate, am I right?
The basic formula was carried over from the original Street Fighter: 3 punches, 3 kicks, and a joystick for movement, jumping, and blocking. Win the round by dropping your opponent's health bar, matches are best of 3, we've all been there. The difference from Street Fighter 1? It actually felt good to play! Movement felt significantly smoother than the first game, your jumps had a defined arc to them, and you had a much better sense of whether you were actually hitting your opponent. And what's this? You could actually perform special moves with consistency? Apart from the basic quarter circle motions, we now had charge motions, rapid tap motions, and even full circle motions. That last one was tricky to pull off, I mostly did those from a jump. However, one of the coolest and most important things about the gameplay in Street Fighter 2 actually was the result of a glitch. As it turns out, while programming the timings to make special moves easier to pull off, the devs noticed something. Namely, if certain moves were performed with the right timing one after another, the new move would be performed immediately, canceling the recovery frames of the previous move. If this sounds familiar to you, that's because that's how combos were born. That's right, a bug was responsible for opening the path to this, and... Some of the devs were kind of worried that such a bug would ruin the game's balance.
Remember, this was in the early 90s, before devs had to juggle like 80 billion characters.
But the team eventually decided to leave it in as an advanced technique for players to discover, and it became one of the most celebrated features in the game. It truly separated the best players from the rest of the pack, especially considering you could challenge a player at any time. Of course, as you played solo, you'd face the rest of the cast, plus a couple of bonus stages, including the car inspired by Final Fight, and the ever-loving barrel break. Once you've beaten the other 7 contenders, 3 mysterious faces would appear on the map. These are the Grandmasters, the bosses of the game. First up is Balrog, a vicious boxer who was banned from the ring and joined the bad guys hoping to score some big money. Second is Vega, a so-called Spanish ninja who wears a mask so his face won't get so much as scratched. Yeah, he's a complete narcissist. He also has a claw and can attack from the fence in his stage. Yikes. The third Grandmaster was familiar to people who somehow beat the first game. This is Sagat, the final boss of the original game. Turns out he wasn't just beaten by Ryu, he got a big fucking scar across his chest and now he's out for vengeance. Beat him and the final boss shows his face. This is M. Bison, the leader of the criminal organization Shadowloo and the master of the tournament. He would since become a major force in many of the games in the series that followed, and he's connected with many of the game's characters in some way. He's also significant for being one of the first genuinely hard fighting game bosses where the game's mechanics weren't actively working against you. While the cartoon and the movie have given this dude his fair share of memes,
of course!
Back in the day, he was a menace, and besting him felt like an accomplishment, rewarding you with your character's ending when you finally pulled it off. Fun fact, the names of the bosses are actually shuffled around from the Japanese version. There, Balrog is Mike Bison, Vega is Balrog, and M. Bison is Vega. They had to shuffle them around for the US because, well, yeah.
Better than what they did for certain other regions where they were simply named Boxer, Claw, and Dictator. Yeah.
The success of Street Fighter II was a turning point for arcades. With its focus on head-to-head multiplayer instead of competing just for the high score, it was not only the best-selling game since the Golden Age, but also helped revitalize a slumping industry. By 1994, it had been played over 25 million times and been ported to numerous platforms, most notably the Super Nintendo, where it was the most successful third-party game on the platform. More than that, however, it was the game that truly legitimized fighting games as a genre, thanks to the nature of its one-on-one fighting. Crowds were gathering around cabinets and even holding local tournaments. In fact, this game laid the foundation for esports today. Without this game, we wouldn't have shit like EVO. Naturally, it inspired a host of other fighting games of varying quality. In fact, some games were so similar, some people considered them clones. In fact, in one particular case, some people included Capcom themselves. The game in question was Data East's Fighter's History. Capcom actually sued Data East, claiming the game to be a blatant ripoff. Capcom lost the case, however, on the grounds that the copied elements were scène à faire, necessary to portray the scenario. So anyway, with the success of Street Fighter II, Capcom didn't want to let a good thing go to waste. And there were some things that Capcom believed could be improved upon and adjusted to make the game better. Unfortunately, this was before the internet age, and you couldn't just work on a patch and instantly distribute it to every machine running your game at 3 in the morning. And you couldn't just DLC new features onto your title either. If you wanted to make updates to your game, you had to put out a whole new version to arcades. New playable characters, new game. New balance updates, new game. New graphical tweaks, new game. Street Fighter II isn't just a game, it's a whole sub-series unto itself.
Now, I realize I brought this up with Josh Scorcher and Top 10 Capcom fails, but there's a reason it was only number 10.
This was a practice which began with Street Fighter II Champion Edition, known as Street Fighter II Dash in Japan. This updated version was released in March of 1992 as an expanded edition of the original SF2 with some notable changes. The first was the addition of mirror matches, which allowed both players to select the same character. Now you could have a fight to see who was better with any given character. This feature was actually locked behind a code in the SNES version of Street Fighter II.
Strange, isn't it?
What's more, this version made the bosses playable, so you could feel their power in your own hands. Of course, this meant that they had to be nerfed somewhat. There were also some changes to the balance of the game, including actual differentiation between Ryu and Ken's movesets, as well as dropping the maximum number of rounds in a match from 10 to 4 before both players lost by default. One of the more infamous aspects of Champion Edition, however, is the abundance of bootlegs of the game. One of the most well-known among these bootlegs is Rainbow Edition, which... yeah. This was one of the reasons that Capcom would release Street Fighter II Hyper Fighting at the end of the year. In this version, the play speed was increased, which made timing more precise and battles quicker and more frantic. Many characters also got new moves and balance changes as well. Yeah, this update followed the philosophy of move fast and break bones. And even after that, Capcom still saw money in the cash cow. But the hardware was getting a bit rusty. Technology moves forward, and the old and busted inevitably must make way for the new hotness. So that means Street Fighter 3, right? That means Street Fighter 3, right? Not quite yet. The SF2 train still had plenty of steam in the tank, so Capcom decided to change tracks to debut its new CPS2 hardware. In 1993, Capcom released Super Street Fighter II: The New Challengers, introduced to players with its revamped intro featuring Ryu, which was referenced in the trailer that announced his DLC debut in Smash for Wii U and 3DS. Super would be the first game to use the CPS2 hardware, which offered better graphics and sound over the CPS1 which the previous iterations used. This version of Street Fighter II had some significant changes, starting with an updated HUD, a new announcer, and some new voices for a few of the characters. Next, there were some new and updated moves for some of the characters. Most notably, Ryu got a fire variation of his Hadouken, Ken got his now iconic Flaming Shoryuken, Zangief got his Atomic Buster, and Bison got his Devil Reverse. The scoring system was also updated, offering bonus points for things like combo count, reversals, first attacks, and recovering from stuns. And then there's the eponymous new challengers. 4 new characters were added to the game, bringing the total roster to 16. There's T-Hawk, a Native American living in Mexico because his ancestral lands were taken by Bison, Fei Long, a movie star who's 100% based on Bruce Lee, DJ, a kickboxing Jamaican musician who's searching for inspiration in a fighting tournament of all places, I don't fucking know. And finally, Cammy, a British Special Forces agent with amnesia and a connection to Bison, the nature of which would eventually be retconned. There was even a special version of the game that required a 4-cabinet setup for tournaments. Again, the game was a huge success, said to have sold 100,000 units in arcades by early 1994. But was Capcom done? Oh, hell no! there was yet another version to be made. After all, Super went back to the speed of the original, a change that players of hyper fighting might not have liked. And thus, in February of 1994, we ended up with Super Street Fighter II Turbo, one of the oldest games to still have an active tournament scene.
Imagine if your grandpa were still able to play basketball. Yeah, that's basically Super Turbo.
Some minor features included an updated HUD with character portraits, as well as some balance adjustments, but there were some big changes as well. The first was adjustable play speed. You had 3 levels of speed, selectable either by the player or the arcade operator. I'm sure people were happy to get their speed back. Second was the addition of the Super Combo Meter. This wasn't the first time that fighting games specifically had super moves, that may have been SNK's Art of Fighting, but it did help popularize the concept. Filling up the meter by dealing damage and then finishing off an opponent with a super move to that glorious sunburst was a thing of beauty. Finally, Super Turbo introduced the series' first secret character. If you were able to meet certain conditions in reaching Bison, a new opponent would appear out of nowhere. This was the introduction of Akuma. And even then, he was a beast. You could even select him via a code, but don't try it at any tournaments. Akuma is banned! Some people even claim that Akuma was inspired by a hoax, which was in turn inspired by a mistranslation of one of Ryu's win quotes. You must defeat Sheng Long to stand a chance. For a while, it was believed that Sheng Long was Ryu's sensei. It was actually the Chinese name for Ryu's Dragon Punch. You want to know proof of Super Turbo's longevity even beyond the tournament scene? It got revisions of its own. First, there was Hyper Street Fighter II, the Anniversary Edition, which included every iteration of every playable character and was the final game to use the CPS-2. Super Street Fighter II Turbo Revival for the fucking Game Boy Advance of all things, an HD remix which featured new sprites and remixed music and balanced suggestions from the community, and even the Switch got a new version called Ultra Street Fighter II, which added Evil Ryu, Violent Ken, Shin Akuma, and a tacked-on minigame with the Joy-Cons. Wow, this is probably the most mileage I've ever seen out of a single base game. And with all the success it garnered, I'm honestly not surprised Capcom stuck with it this long. It revitalized arcades, ignited the fighting game genre, and even laid the groundwork for esports. Calling Street Fighter II influential is doing it a disservice. It was nothing short of a revolution, and one of the most important games ever made. It's honestly quite amazing when you think about it, especially considering where it came from.
And that's just Street Fighter II. Most Street Fighter games had their own sub-series of their own. Street Fighter Alpha, Street Fighter 3, even EX. But each of those are stories to be told for another time. I do need to keep these videos within a reasonable length after all. I don't make feature films. I'm the Quarter Guy, and until next time, the arcade is closed.
You know how Kirby final bosses seem like they're out of place? Well, if you think about it enough, it begins to make perfect sense. I mean, aside from King Dedede, who's probably better off as a frenemy than anything else, Kirby's fought evil wizards, giant insects, eldritch horrors, and other crazy stuff. What's the common link here? Simple. Kirby is fighting against the stuff of nightmares. Next time, top 10 Kirby bosses. It's game time! Hey everyone, QG here. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and share the video around. Feel free to check out my Twitter and my Twitch streams, and consider supporting me through Patreon and donating to my Extra Life campaign to support Children's Wisconsin. Thanks for watching.